Good morning, PT on Ice family. Today is Monday, 12/11. Let me get my watch ready here. See if anybody jumps on there. So 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, December 11th. Hope everybody is doing well and people are feeling strong. I feel like we've got a lot going on. Good morning, Jordan. Good to see you. So some people are going to roll in, and we're going to talk a little bit about lifestyle overload syndrome, which is sort of like a in air quotes thing. But let me just jump right into it. I know there's a ton of stuff going on the ice side of the equation, and I wish I had a list of things to announce because there's almost too many to keep track of. But I was keeping an eye yesterday on some of the work being done out in Colorado with Justin Morgan and Jeremy Fletcher, who sort of Skyped in. It looked like a really, really good course. And there's a whole bunch of stuff flying around. We're getting ready to start up our next APHPT cohort in January, so that's looking pretty solid so far. And there's going to be a whole bunch of other things coming down the pike. So without really diving into that too much, just happy Monday. It's good to see you, and we'll get rolling here as I start the clock. All right, so 15 minutes to go. What we're talking about this morning is this idea of lifestyle overload syndrome, which is, of course, a totally bogus thing. It's not a real thing. It's something that I sort of throw the terms around because there is no real good term for what we see out there. There's a lot of people trying to figure it out, right? So I've heard some people call it stress dysregulation. I've heard other people sort of throw it into the family of burnout, whether that be professional burnout or whatever you want to call it. In a sense, it's like a different version of failure to thrive. When we talk about failure to thrive, we're often talking about, someone sort of end of life and just kind of giving up. But in a sense, if you think of thrive more as, live the best version of yourself, it might be just inability to do that one way or another. And the reason why I bring it up is kind of like a part two on last week. So I don't want to go too much into the depth there, and I would just refer you back to that episode if you haven't seen it. But this basic idea that we are becoming a higher anxiety culture by the years, and that is having an absolutely physical, biological effect on us. That kind of impact shows up in our health, and it's a major problem. And so I talked a little bit about this idea that it could be one model that's out there and was done in an article, I think around 2012, 2013, was this idea of an exaggerated threat response, right? So sensitivity to threat. And that, of course, is something that we often talk about, especially in sort of modern pain science or psychologically informed practice. We often covered that idea of someone who has this kind of overdeveloped threat responder, and it kind of stays on and it keeps on, and eventually that leads to other problems. So we might call it hypervigilance, like whatever you want to call that. The basic idea is that the system is tuned up and it's kind of turned on, and it's hard to turn back off, and it triggers very sensitively, and so that idea of sensitivity becomes a major problem. Now, sort of big picture, and I always like to start with sort of the big picture and boil it down. This is a major issue. I mean, if you look at the stats on anxiety overall, they'll tell you that it's about 30 million people who this is affecting, right? So anxiety disorder is kind of in the bucket. In the workplace, we often talk about the term well-being. Well-being is kind of becoming the trendy term. You're seeing this move away from wellness. People don't love that term because wellness often connotes this idea of physical robustness, and then it leaves out the entire other side of the spectrum, which is kind of this psychological robustness or this resilience or whatever you want to call that. And so the key thing first to know is that that's 30 million people is a big chunk of people, of course, but that's only the people who have likely been diagnosed already. So there are a whole bunch of other people, and some of the incidence studies out there, there's one done by the folks at Harvard, and they said that as many as 30% of the U.S. population, by the time they're 13 years old, is going to have some sort of disorder along the mental health well-being axis, whatever you want to call that, whether that be a depressive episode to anxiety disorder or whatever you really want to call that. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. It's happening earlier in life, and really no one is doing a great job at dealing with this. And so that's kind of the context. The second part is that the context itself matters, right? And so we often talk about this in the APHPT course and with any of the CERT grads. We often talk about this idea of sort of upstream, downstream pathway, and that we can never sort of ignore the influences that get that sort of set a person up to succeed or fail. Some of them, of course, being genetic. Some of them, of course, being epigenetic. I mean, we could dive into that. That's a whole other side of it. We know there's a whole social determinant thing here. Sort of the places where you live and sort of how you grew up and the context that you're in. We know that early childhood conditions make a major role here, and early childhood experiences especially. We had a guest on for our members, who talked. Dr. Mark Hall talked quite a bit about adverse childhood experiences, or what they often call ACEs. And so all of this factors in. And so to say that behaviors are really the answer, the standalone, that would be completely wrong, right? So I don't want to go in thinking that. I don't want to start today to say, hey, it's all about health behavior. It's not. It's definitely not all about health behavior. What I would say is that as professionals, health behavior is an area where we could intervene. It's an opening. It's a place where we can put a foot in the door, and then we can begin to go in from there. So to me, I look at that as kind of, like looking through like the old keyhole idea. You're sort of looking through the keyhole. You can only see a little tiny hole, but if you really can angle yourself, you can see a lot that's going on behind the door. And so that's really what, in my mind, what health behaviors and a lot of where clinicians can really fit into this is that we've got to explore these things. We've got to get into some of those depths, and to do that, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to just kind of take whatever room there is to go, whatever crack there is, and get your foot in there and start working. And so I'm sort of an applied type person, a practical kind of a person. Like, I love the theory, I love the learning of it, but when it really comes down to making a difference in someone's life, it's about putting boots on the ground and getting started. It's about making some mistakes. It's often messy. It's usually not going to be perfect the first time, and it's about getting in there and prying things open and getting going. And so that's hard because we don't always have all the answers, but what we do have is enough information to act, and that's really, I think, what the real theme here is that if we're going to change this idea of people who are just kind of walking around as zombies, like overloaded with their lifestyles just beating them down, we have to have enough information to act, and then we need to act. And that's pretty much like how the whole thing comes down. So again, if you think about it, in many ways, if you're a physical therapist, if you're in other conservative care and you're listening or seeing this, you know that many, many times people are bringing you things that look and smell and feel and taste and touch like aches and pains. Like, that's what they're walking through. That's what they think they're walking in to get solved. But you also know it doesn't take long for you to sort of ascertain that this is not simply just a straight up lateral ankle sprain that you're seeing. This is a lateral ankle sprain because, and it's like boom, 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 tons of other things that come with it, right? It's not just a person walking in the door saying, hey, I had this weird thing that happened, my back hurt. It's a person who walks in with back pain. That's your crack in the door. And when you look through the keyhole, it's like, man, you were going to unravel 50 other things here. So to me, that is what lifestyle overload syndrome is all about. It's the person who comes in and they're kind of beaten down with life. They're usually in their, probably 25 to 50s. They're often a primary earner, or they have definitely financial stress associated with life. That could be younger and younger because of the debacle that we see with higher education and student loans. Sorry, that's a soapbox for another day. But what we can do is understand that when we get financial pressure, when we get family pressure, we start getting all these things piled on, people have a hard time, and they show it biologically. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that you've got to understand what you're looking at. Now, for me, I'm going to tell you always that there is a cluster of tests, if that's what you want to call it, a cluster of indicators that can tell you quite a bit about a person. Some of them is just how they carry themselves, how they talk and act, simple things like their respiratory rate, their blood pressure, their heart rate. Those things are going to be amazing, and we should be taking that on every single person that walks in the door. Second thing, of course, is some of the simple blood metrics. What I'm going to tell you is things like triglycerides and glucose cannot be understated because they're easy to get. Most people have them anyway. If you can't get them, if they don't have a primary care physician or they don't see somebody that often, you can put this directly in your clinic in most states. So you can do this and you can and do it without that much difficulty. If you need help, let me know. And we can kind of get that information from most people. That information tells us a lot about how their body is handling life, is processing. And then we can begin, and only then can we begin to actually work backward from there. Like, okay, so I see that your glucose is creeping up over time. How would you possibly know that as a clinician in, let's say, an outpatient setting? Even in a hospital setting, you might see it, but do you have it over time? You have longitudinal data to see that it's been going up, or are you looking at a snapshot in time? I'm going to tell you that that longitudinal data is 10 times better. So the ability to say, hey, it's been going up over time tells me something. Now, it could certainly tell me that you're eating crappy. Sure, we could go down that road. It could certainly tell me that you're being more sedentary. Absolutely, makes total sense. It could certainly tell me, as we talked about last time, that your stress is a little bit out of sorts and you're not sleeping well. Oh, okay, that's a little different. That's one that we haven't really talked about and gone into much depth. It also can tell me that you might be seeing the signs, sort of the body reacting to a lifetime of that, and that it's finally just kind of showing the wear and tear that we know you've been going through. Only when you have that can you actually begin to dose our interventions. And to me, that's the next frontier. It's the next logical step. And I'm happy that we see it. There was some cool stuff going on Twitter this weekend about, is lifestyle or is exercise really medicine? Should we be approaching it that way? Zach Rethorn, he's a really smart guy, has brought up lots of really good sort of insightful ways of looking at it. And of course, the answer is yes and no, right? It's a lifestyle, and in some cases it is medicine. It depends on who you're talking to, but that's a perfect example. What would we do with a person whose blood sugar has been slowly and steadily creeping up? What's our programming going to be? If you don't think that's a skilled intervention, then I don't know what is. If dosing exercise is not a skilled intervention, then I don't know what is. So for me, we're always going to go back to move, fuel, recover, and we're going to start there, and we're going to say, well, clearly your body is not enduring. Okay, it could be a connect issue. Let's explore that a little bit. But clearly your body is not enduring, so let's back it down and see what we can do. Tell me about your exercise history. Tell me what you're doing. Well, I get on the treadmill and I spend 20 minutes on the treadmill. Oh, that's fantastic. The problem is that we know for most people, we're not going to even get through the blood sugar in, like the resting blood sugar for the first 40 minutes or so. So we're never actually going to tap into anything else beyond that. So that 30 minutes could be helpful, or that 20 minutes could be helpful. It might not be. But how long have you been doing it? Oh, I've been doing it for 10 years. Wow, so your legs are probably pretty well adapted to that dosage. Would that make us think as practitioners, as professionals, that we should be tapping into other muscles that maybe aren't quite as well adapted? We might be able to challenge the system a little bit more, okay? Like stress it with the right amount of stress. Could we be doing some strength and some loading and say, hey, how about if we load this thing a little bit? We're probably going to get even more out of it. Maybe we're going to cut back on the treadmill and we're going to change things. Or how about just as simply as this? How about we just do the loading work first and do the treadmill stuff after? If we change that parameter, is that going to make a difference? Well, how on earth would you as a clinician know? I mean, seriously. I get it. I love evidence-informed practice. I love that. And people go, oh, well, the science says, here's the study that says this would happen. But is it happening in your client? Do you know? I mean, if you don't know, then something is being missed here. And so to me, that's a big part of this, having those indicators and being able to say, I know because I've tracked it. I've seen it happen over time. Now, the second part of this that I think is huge, and I will say this just straight out to anybody, is that the more we start tracking this stuff as a collective, the better chance we can actually show that it's valuable at the societal level. And if we're going to go in and try to say, hey, like exercise dosing, exercise truly is something that's medicinal. Maybe it's not medicine for everybody, but it's got a medicinal effect. If it's got a medicinal effect, then I want to be able to get paid to do it if that's what my career is. The only way that happens is by bringing in data and saying, look, here is my exercise protocol that I took this person through. This was the progression. These were the goals. This is how I got there. And over time, we saw a reduction. The same thing goes for fruits, vegetables, and fiber. Right? What if a person comes in and says, listen, I eat nothing. Like all I eat is meat, cheese, eggs, and dairy. And you say, geez, we got to get some fiber in your life because we know that that's going to blunt the sugar effect. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, let's start with whatever we can do. The person says, look, I will eat one orange. Like, that's it. Okay, it's a start. We're going to dose it, and we're going to try to slowly and steadily titrate it up. That's got a medicinal effect, right? What if we start saying, hey, like we should explore some of the science on other things related? What about if we can get that person a good night's sleep? Instead of just general advice like, hey, you know what, you ought to, dim the lights in your room. Like, that's a beautiful thing. Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I could find that on Google. What about if we actually test, retest, track it? These are all indicators. These are things that we need to know. So, of course, I'm going to go back always and tell you that you having that, not only is it guiding for you, it's also fantastically rewarding for the person. So remember that this lifestyle stuff is about getting back your life. If you're lifestyle overloaded, if you're stress dysregulated, like, you feel a sense of loss of control. That's probably one of the strongest and most important things that we see out there. That loss of control comes back when you can see my effort has produced that result, right? Like, I did something, you gave me an idea, I did it, and I got a result. Wow, like, I'm in control here again. Right? If that's not the essence of what we're trying to do with our interventions, I mean, we're not, in most part, conservative care professionals are not trying to addict people to care. I mean, to me, like, there are a lot of people out there doing that, and like, I could rail about that for hours on end. But that's not the goal. Our goal is to give people their life back. To hand it back to them and say, you got this, man. Like, I'm here to help you. Yeah, I'm going to help you get started. I'm going to get the wheels going, because sometimes inertia is the hardest part. But once you get rolling, you've got this. I go from being your coach to maybe your cheerleader, and like, hey, you can totally do this. But the only way to do that is for someone to see some progress, to see some actual gains. When they see those gains and they say, hey, you know what? That's amazing. I never knew that my intersession, glucose could change by X. I never knew that 24 hours after eating a decent diet and getting some exercise, oh, geez, there's the watch. I can drop my triglycerides by X number of points. So obviously, I could go into this topic all day, and I'll spare you from that. I think the point is this. If we're willing to recognize that there are exaggerated threat responses out there, right? That exaggerated response of the body is probably not a good thing. If we're willing to just sort of say that, and then we can track it back and say, okay, what's causing that? Then I think we can, dive into it. Ryan, that was very kind. I see your thing. Keep going. Yeah. You're the only one. We'll get on a sidebar because, poor everybody else is like, oh my God, like, make them stop. But so here's the thing to keep to keep in mind, right? Is that when we have this whole recognition of a system that's overloaded, and we all go through it at some level, then we can start to actually connect with the person in front of us and the people around us and the populations that we serve. And then we can start to give some hope back and say, listen, like, it is what it is. This is where you're at. This is what your indicators say. Fine. Now let's start working to slowly and steadily get you back to where we want them to be, maybe where they should be or where they can be. And that gives a person hope. And then when they can see that progress and they can say, hey, you know what? This is work, man. This is work. This is hard, right? Then they are actually rehabilitating their lifestyle overload syndrome. Now, I'm not like a big guy who believes that we are rehabilitation people only, right? But that is something that much of society needs rehabilitation from. That we are being beaten down by this overload of stress, that we are burning out left and right, and that I think it's time for us to step up, see where the opportunities are, and go from there. All right, guys, this is going to be a good week. I'm feeling pretty good about it. Listen, I mean, it is only Monday. I don't know. You guys got me fired up this morning. Thank you for that. Thanks for being on with me. Have a great rest of the week. Make it count.